So let's get started. Thanks for tuning in again. Good evening. My name is Eric Elliott, and I'm the Advanced Hunter Education Coordinator with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And as a way of introducing our topic tonight, let me just ask you, have you ever missed a shot at a big game animal and you actually had a legitimate alibi? Meaning the miss was because there was a legitimate malfunction in your gear. This happened to me once on a backcountry hunt. I thought I had done everything completely right. The wind was right. It was perfect. The buck that I spotted the buck before he spotted me. I took a prone rest. I was relaxed, breathed a big exhaling breath, squeezed the trigger, and to my utter horror, the buck ran off. And I think I heard him laughing at me as he left the country. I inspected my gun, and after that, I found that the scope was completely loose. There was a noticeable wobble to it. The weird thing is that I had the scope mounted by a local big game sporting goods store prior to this hunt. Now, I'm not saying that I couldn't have blown chunks on that shot. I've been known to miss, but I'm pretty sure that loose scope didn't help matters. So this webinar is designed to take the mystery out of how to mount a scope on your rifle. Tonight is part 2 of a 3-part series on rifle scopes. I'm thankful to have with me tonight Rick Kagawa and Alex Van as presenters. Rick and Alex both serve their communities as hunter education instructors. Both are also active in serving in the Boy Scouts. Rick is an NRA certified counselor and coach, and he's going to be the primary presenter tonight. Alex has served as a fireman in Southern California, and like a lot of firemen, is truly a jack of all trades. When I asked him, hey, do you know how to mount a scope to a rifle? He's like, yeah, my dad told me that if I own a gun, I should actually know how to work on it. So guys, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. Take it away.
Well, good evening. I'm going to start out with a question tonight. Instead of Shauna Loggie's poor jokes, I'm going to ask the question. And this question goes to, and what I want you to do is in the chat, tell me which answer you think is most right. There'll be some that might be right, but there's a most right answer. And here's the question. Last week, somebody asked me about an LPVO, and I knew that they were primarily used on ARs, but I started thinking about it, and I go, I think there's a better answer than the answer I gave. So here's the question. This is a 1x6x24 scope. So what that tells you is that it's a variable optic. It goes 1 to 6 power, and it's got a 24 millimeter front objective lens. So number 1, not enough magnification. 2, dials are exposed. 3, too small objective for light gathering. 3, scope tube is too small for windage elevation. So why don't you guys start putting in the chat what you think your answer should be, and we'll give it a little bit of time.
Rick, it looks like most of them are picking option 3.
And that is the most right option. There are other options such as number 1, maybe number 4, but I don't think that's it's mainly 1 and 3 that are the correct answers, but 3 is the most correct answer. If you look at this scope, a 24 objective is pretty tiny. Most hunting scopes are anywhere between 40 and up to 60, so in millimeters in objective. So, all right, let's talk about attaching a scope to a rifle. Some of the rifles, you will have to purchase a scope mount to put on the receiver. And if you look at my little fuchsia arrow here, this is the scope mount on this rifle. This piece right here, it's a chunk of metal that is actually screwed into the receiver with threads that are actually built into the receiver. So this is screwed to the rifle, and then these rings here are mounted onto the scope base or scope mount. So here's the rings, here's the base, and then the rifle receiver is right here. So everything's screwed in. In fact, you can see a screw right there in the picture. So anyway, some older rifles uh, tend to have a mount screwed into it. The newer rifles you'll see will have what they call a Picatinny rail, or some people will call it a 913 rail. They're both the same. It's the same piece, but they're milled into the top of the receiver. And on my suggestion, you're going to hear this multiple times tonight, so you don't get the rifle loose on your rifle in a hunting situation, or hopefully it doesn't come loose, is use blue Loctite on all your receiver rings and screw rings and ring screws. So here is a Picatinny rail on one of my rifles and the scope mount that goes on it. This happens to be a scope mount that you can detach from the rifle easily. And so it's way easier to do this than unscrew all my scopes and show you a Picatinny that is actually screwed on. But this is a quick release scope mount, so you can put it in a bag and save your scope. But anyway, that's a Picatinny on top, or a 913 rail. You'll occasionally hear them called 913s, but they're exactly the same piece.
Hey, Rick, I have a question that
Yeah,
someone it was asked, why is number 3 correct? It mentions light gathering, but I thought folks should not be hunting when it's difficult to see, is the question that Jen asked.
You're always going to have a situation that it's legal hunting time, but it's either dusk or dawn. And it may be hard to see your game, but you can see it legally. And so the larger objective lens gives you more light gathering, because it just has more surface area to gather light. And so your image will be clearer in your scope if you have more light. And that's the reason for that the other scope didn't work out, because it's got half the objective of most hunting scopes.
All right, thank you.
So the next part is the hardest part I had to figure out when I started doing this was, how do you figure the height of a scope ring? I recommend that you take out your cell phones and take a picture of the screen so you get the website. This is called gununiversity.com, and it actually will take all the considerations and give you all the ring combinations you have if you want to do it, don't want to do it manually. But I learned how to do it manually because this website didn't exist when I started doing this. So here's the manual method. Stack quarters on top of your rifle, on top of your scope mount. And what you want is the scope objective, this part right here, as close to the barrel as you can get it. Because if you have, the further it is away from the barrel, the more parallax there is. In other words, they're parallel, but they sort of, they'll at some point they'll touch. The points will touch. And so what you want to do is you want to have it as parallel as you can, so you're not getting too much distance between the barrel and the objective. So that's the point of this, is to find out what height your scope rings. And so you measure this height, and you measure it usually to the center of the scope tube right here. Here's the scope tube right here. You measure it usually to the center of the scope tube, to the bottom of the Picatinny. And that's how your scope rings are measured. And so there's low, medium, high, and sometimes there's even extra high scope rings for all the scopes. So you just kind of got to play it by ear and figure out which one you want. But you want it as close to the barrel as you can get it. So now that you've got your scope rings and your scope tube there, now it's time to start putting stuff together. So what you want to do is you want to attach your rings, the part that holds the scope onto the gun. You want to mount them, but just snug the bolts, because you're probably going to have to move them. And so you mount your scope and then put the rings on top, because the rings are capped on top. And so just mount them so they're snug, but you can still move the scope back and forth and see how the scope is in. You need to adjust the scope for yourself. So it's called setting eye relief. So get down on your rifle, look down through the scope, and It may be black. You may see a piece of the scope. What you want to do, you want to see as much inside of the ocular lens, the lens that's on your eye. You want to see as much of the picture that you can get. That's the trick. So and so you have to move the scope back and forth. You may need to change the comb height of your rifle to get so that your eye is the right height to the range you've chosen too. So make sure that you do that. And the other one is, I suggest when I tell people to change the height of your rifle, if you're going to do it with a glue-on pad or something with a pad, don't wrap it around the side of the rifle. Make it only on the top, because if you put a pad on the side of the rifle, it will move your face away from the center of the scope. So make sure that you don't put something between the side of the scope and your face. It's only on the top to raise and lower your cheek position. Some rifles will have an adjustable comb too, which is the top of the stock. So the next part of the project is to take your rifle and you have to stabilize the rifle with either sandbags, gun vise, lead sled. I've done it a bunch of different ways, but you just need to make sure that your gun is stable in some type of holding device. And then you level the scope against the level rifle. So the rifle's level, then you level the scope at this, and that's where we're going to get to. You'll see this in a second. So this is my setup. This is my gun vise. There's actually a strap that goes over the barrel if you want to mount that way. My levels are all on there, and so I'll show you how my system. But this is the overall system, so you can see what it looks like in the big picture. So these are the levels I use. The Wheeler level is expensive, but I bought it because I do enough of this. I probably mount 3 or 4 rifles a year. But I'm going to tell you, you don't need this fancy a setup. I started doing this with levels from the hardware store. They were just line levels that I bought. The line levels that cost like $7 or $5 a piece. So you don't need to do the super expensive stuff. You can do it with cheap levels, but any kind of level will do. And so this is another set that came. This set over here is the set that came with a scope mounting kit that I bought. So
hey Rick, we have another question that someone is asking. Can you describe the Picatinny rails a little bit different? How they affect MOA and the size of the gaps on the Picatinny rails? Because this person's
fixed. The gaps in the rail are a fixed number.
Right,
and
but then how is that different than an MOA? Because this person...
MOA is completely different. That's the cross. That's the way that the MOA is the dials and how the dials operate. And so the Picatinny is how it's mounted onto the rifle. Picatinny is kind of that, and there's a bunch of different new mounts that have come out in the last 5 years. There's a camera mount that people use for other things, but the Picatinny is a real common way that people mount accessories and flashlights or whatever they want on their rifles. But Picatinny is a very stable system for mounting the scope, and it's easy because it's preset and it's got a standard to it.
Right.
So they're asking a question about 2 different things. MOA is a completely different subject than the Picatinny itself.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So what I did here, I know on my rifle with the scope mounted on it that this surface on my particular rifle is perfectly flat. And I know that it's flat because it's part of the stock of the rifle. So it's flat against the receiver and everything else in there and the bolt. So what I did was, as you see, I leveled it side to side. You really don't have to worry too much about up and down with the fore and aft with the gun, whether it's the muzzle up or muzzle down or stock up, stock down. It's not that critical. The side to side is the most critical because you're trying to match the crosshairs, the x-axis of the crosshairs, the flat axis of the crosshairs, not the vertical axis. You're trying to match the flat to the gun and the scope. And then what I do is after I level it here, I actually use this level and bolt this level to the barrel. And this level and the other level were perfectly level. This level and this level at that point were perfectly level. So I knew that anytime I looked at this bubble, that the chassis and the receiver and everything were perfectly flat when I did that. So,
And then we have another question, Rick, about lapping rings for hunting accuracy perspective.
Lapping rings, especially before Picatinny rails, lapping rings was probably pretty critical when everything was handmade. But today, everything's computer numeric controlled, it's CNC built. And so the tolerances are pretty tight, plus or minus 10,000. And I haven't lapped a set of rings in probably 20 years. I actually own a lapping kit, but I haven't used it ever. I can't remember the last time I used it because it's really unnecessary today to make sure that the rings, lapping kits, what they do is make sure the rings are perfectly parallel to the system. But today with Picatinny rails, I think before Picatinny rails and when they were using scope mount bases so that you screwed into the bases and you had two sets of rings, I think lapping may have been pretty critical. But today, this is my opinion. So, you know, lapping is kind of obsolete because we don't need to, because the stuff is so machined to such tight tolerances today. You can disagree with me. You can lap your rings. It doesn't hurt, but I've never seen it where lapping was an issue in accuracy ever. And I hang out with a bunch of precision and rifle guys, and they don't lap their rings either. So that tells you something. They do that. Some of these guys do it for a living.
And then Rick, another question for you. They're asking about the height of the rings. If you can't operate your bolt action because your scope is too low, then you have to elevate it. Is that going to change your aim and your distance for shooting? How is that going to affect it if you go too high with your rings?
It's probably going to affect more than anything the parallax of whether the barrel and the scope are parallel to each other, and at some point they're going to have to meet, right? Where the bullet goes and the scope crosshairs have to meet at some point. So all it does is spread that, make a bigger angle in the parallax so that you want it as close as possible, but it's not super critical. I've seen some precision rifle guys with giant gaps between their barrels and their rings, and it's like their barrels and their scope objectives, and it's like, okay, whatever, they works for them. So, but the theory is that you want it as close, you want the objective bell, the front of the scope, to be as close to the barrel as possible. That makes sense, Alex?
Yeah. And then it's okay. You don't need a Picatinny rail. If you have the screws to mount the rings, you can mount it directly to the rifle, correct?
Correct. That's why I said Picatinny is so accurate. The chances of you needing to lap your scope rings is pretty minimal.
Would you recommend somebody that has the screws to mount your scope on the receiver to put a Picatinny rail on first and then the scope, or just go directly to those screws?
I've done both. That rifle that I showed without the Picatinny rail is my personal hunting rifle, but I did it, I mounted that thing probably 12 years ago, and the Picatinny rails weren't available for rifles to put on the top of a receiver. Today they're more available. So yes, I would do a Picatinny rail on top of receiver, the scope rings. If you have to use a base to put on your rifle to mount your scope, if you could find a Picatinny, that would be my choice, and you probably can. They're pretty common.
Thank you.
So back to the leveling of the scope. So I've leveled the rifle. Now I'm going to move the scope so that the top turret is basically always built to be parallel with the horizontal line in your scope. So the top turret is your base, and you put your level on that. If your rifle's level and the side to side on your scope is level, mount it. That's where you want to be. So that makes sense. All right. Now we're ready to torque the screws down. And in my old days, I have crushed the scope by cranking down on the screws. And so now I'm very cautious about how much pressure I put on a screw, because you can overpressure these clamps. The scope rings are so powerful they can crush a scope tube. So my suggestion is to invest. If you're going to do this, the one thing you do invest in is levels and a torque screwdriver. And it's measured. Torque screwdrivers are measured in inch pounds, not foot pounds, inch pounds. And I went to look for a chart for inch pounds, and when you do foot pounds on engines and big stuff, you have for a 3/8 inch screw with this thread, you should use this kind of torque on the screw. I couldn't find that for scope mount screws. So, but anyway, most screws on a scope range from 15 inch pounds to 45 inch pounds. The small screws are usually 15 to 20 inch pounds. I've seen when they have a nut on the side of the scope mount to mount the rifle, like the picture of the very first rifle I showed you, that one had a big nut on it. That one's a inch pound nut. But you get to know this as you go, and most manufacturers will give you the inch pound ratings they want you to use on their scope mounts. One of them was really cool. It was actually engraved in the scope mount. I thought, oh, that's awesome. They're getting smart.
So Rick, how much of an investment financially would this be to get rolling with this, to get your torque screwdriver and a set of levels? Are we talking like $100 or less?
50 bucks.
50 bucks.
50 bucks.
Right on.
And the 50 bucks will come with a torque screwdriver. And if the levels cost you more than 20 bucks, I'd really be surprised. So 50 bucks, I think you can get into it and start.
Yeah. And so what's the advantage to actually doing this on our own rather than having a sporting goods store do it?
I've seen sporting goods stores mount these and they don't level the scope. And so if you think about that, they mount them. They don't. I've never seen one use an inch pound screwdriver either. And so you've got a guy over there mounting, just putting your scope on your rifle, and you don't even know if your objective or your crosshairs are perfectly level. And if you think your crosshairs are not level and they're cockeyed, it's not. If you're not going to go vertically when you move, the elevation adjustment or the wind adjustments is not going to be perfect, because it's going to go to the side or down or up, depending on whether it's windage or elevation. So it's really important you have your crosshairs perfectly, the vertical line vertical and the horizontal line perfectly level on the rifle. It's critical.
So a lot of it's peace of mind and knowing that it's done right.
Right. And I'm just OCD enough. I want to learn how to do it. That's all.
Yeah, I love it.
And so it's kind of I can work on a car. I certainly can mount a scope on a rifle. So
right.
Any questions, Alex?
I think we're good on questions right now.
What's that?
Most of the people, like for me, it was a great bonding time with my dad, teaching me how to mount it, making me take it off, put it back on, making sure I'm doing everything correctly. And that was bond. And I also done the same thing with my son. So it's a great way to bond. It's also a great way to know your rifle, because if you're out on a 3-day backpacking trip and something goes wrong, you're going to lose the opportunity for the hunt that you're on. So for me, it's a little bit of money, a little bit of investment in time, and once you learn it, you'll never forget it.
Right.
And you know how to fix it in the wild too. So that's a big difference. All right. So here's two of my torque screwdrivers that I own. The yellow ones I use when I'm at home on my workbench is the one I use on my workbench. But when I actually carry a inch pound or inch pound torque wrench in my kit that I carry to the range, and that's the one on the left. This one here, you dial it up to the inch pound you want and it clicks. This one over here, this line over here, you twist it until it matches one of these lines up here, and that's your inch pounds. But I work on scopes a lot of times at the range, and this kit pretty much takes care of me. But the fix-it kits are about the size of a card deck, a little bigger than a playing card deck. So they're pretty cool to carry with you on a hunt or even to the range. But boy, you're always needing tools, so it really helps. Okay, now we've got the scope level on the rifle. If you're going to put a level on your scope, and the reason you put a level on your scope is that you want to make sure that when you're shooting, that your rifle's not canted. And so this level tells you your rifle's not canted, and your vertical's vertical and your horizontal's horizontal. And so this is a good time to mount your level on your rifle. At the same time, you've got all this stuff all done. You might as well just mount it, so you don't have to set it up again once you do it. And so this, if you look, this level's mounted on the left side of my gun, and I can just look up and see that the gun's level before I take the shot. Again, Loctite is your friend. And Alex, I know we don't want to use red, we want to use blue Loctite. If you look at the little symbol down under the 242, it says removable. So blue Loctite does come apart. Red Loctite is glued together. So use blue Loctite. It's the soft stuff that you can remove the screw.
Yeah, I know there's like someone just mentioned in the chat to use the purple. I've always used 242. It's never failed me, and I definitely like it. There's another question that somebody asked, the difference between the dovetail mounts, which are more wedged, versus the Picatinny rails. Do you want to talk a little bit?
Dovetail mounts are generally on a 22. They're actually a set of grooves, and then a clamp into the grooves. They're generally used on 22s only. It's really not stable enough for high-powered rifles, but 22s it works perfectly. So, but dovetail mounts are common, very common on older 22s. Today's world, man, everything's got a Picatinny on it now, pretty much. Almost all the new rifles have Picatinnies on them.
All right, excellent, thank you.
And I think we're at questions. Alex, do we have anything in the Q&A?
And answering, you pretty much answered them all the way down. You
Yeah.
know, it's the biggest question is the differences between the dovetail. You know, like you said before, it's a wedge that's clamping on to that dovetail versus a Picatinny, which gives you actually more surface area, more locations that are tighter. And if you take your scope off, you can put them back on at the same location.
Not
If you have
just that, a dovetail on a high-powered rifle will slide because it's two very small slots. They're not very big in the top of the rifle, and things clamp on those two slots that go along the top of the receiver. So it doesn't have a place for it.
All right, Jose has a question for you. Would it be worthwhile replacing an existing Weaver rail with a Picatinny?
If it's already mounted and sighted in, I keep that first one I showed that's not a Picatinny, it's a Weaver, and I haven't changed it. It's been rock solid for me for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah. And then Garth asked, do you mark your screws once you mount it?
No, I don't, because I use Loctite.
Okay.
I'm dependent on the Loctite, and I have not been failed, ever.
Yeah. Do you have any fears mounting scopes to a very high-powered rifle?
What was that?
David asked, do you have any fears mounting scopes to a very high-powered rifle?
Not really. I mean, they're built. My biggest fear is I have some pretty high powered rifles, and I actually sent a rifle in. I broke a scope. I sent it in the manufacturer with a lifetime warranty, and they replaced the scope. I broke it again exactly the same way, and they recorded it, and they said, "Here's your money back." So, I mean, it's more breaking the scope with a super high powered rifle than it is breaking the mounts. The mounts are, if you, and this one has a Picatinny on it. If you have a Picatinny, I don't think an elephant can break a Picatinny rail.
Yeah.
I've got a question in the chat about eye relief. Can you go over eye relief a little bit, Rick and Alex, and how you set that up?
It's really everybody's cheek height and angle on the stock is going to be different. It's this well right here. Everybody's cheeks are different height, they're different widths, and so it puts you in a different place on the rifle. And everybody's eye objective, moving the scope back and forth in the rings, moves the objective lens or the ocular lens closer and further to your eye, and that changes the perspective inside the scope. You'll see a black ring around it if you're too far or too close, and or it'll be all black if you're too far away. But if you move the scope back and forth, and sometimes on the Picatinnies, you have to actually move it on the rail or loosen, move the rings forward or backwards, depending on what your eye relief is from where you originally mounted. So eye relief is a real personal thing. It's not, but the universal thing you want is as much vision of your image in the scope. When you just mount, and if you want to test it, mount the rifle, close your eyes, open your eyes, and you should see the same picture that you saw. If not, you need to probably change your eye relief.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the eye relief, because as the paramedic in me is always wondering about to avoid the scope bite, and the mistakes I've seen people do is they're mounting it on a table and not really properly shouldering the rifle for that eye relief, because it's going to be different when you do it on a table versus testing it out and making sure it's correct. Or you go out shooting or hunting and use somebody else's rifle, and the eye is different, and you're adjusting your eye closer and not properly shouldering the rifle, and when you pull that trigger, you're going to get a little bite.
Yeah, you're going to get scope bite, which is a cut on your eye that you use to see through the scope, because it cuts you right up here because of the recoil. So eye relief is pretty critical for more than just seeing through the scope.
And make sure
that it's not too close, that when it recoils, you're not gonna get scoped. And most of the time, if you're getting scoped, you're way too close to the ocular lens anyway, and you don't have a good sight picture. So just know that.
Yeah, and make sure you practice different positions. I know another comment, you got to make sure you're practicing prone, standing, sitting, multiple positions that you should be, practicing to make sure that your eye relief, when you're sitting, your eye relief is correct, and that you practice shouldering it correctly.
Shoot your rifle before you go hunting.
Yeah.
So that's a key. This is a relatively short one. I actually had this one in the sighting in the same seminar, and I went, maybe a little bit too much information. So I separated into two other seminars. So this is the short one of the three. All right, Eric, I think it's yours.
Okay, I think there's a couple other questions talking about, have you ever used laser levels for aligning scope axis? Is there advantages, disadvantages versus bubble levels?
I have used I just used the laser level for the first time on a scope for my son, and it was an LPVO. It was a low power optic, and the crosshairs were so tiny I couldn't use it with the laser, because what it does is it puts a laser through the scope, and it puts it on a piece of paper. So the laser goes through the scope on a piece of paper, and then you can level the crosshairs against the laser that goes through the
Yeah.
scope. And the problem was his crosshairs were so tiny, it didn't go across the whole screen. It was just a tiny dot with crosshairs in it. The crosshairs were small, so small, I had to go back to using a bubble level. So it's not like I think the laser stuff is good, but the one application I tried it on, it didn't work because the crosshairs were too small. They didn't go across the whole scope.
Okay, very good. And then I see a question about bore sighting, and that's kind of a good segue to the next webinar that you're going to be doing for us,
Yeah, I
Rick.
think I owe that person $1.
Exactly. So yeah, we're going to be talking about bore sighting and how to sight in a scope rifle in an upcoming webinar. So we'll not address that question right now. And Rick, if you could stop sharing your screen, and then we'll go ahead and close out the webinar. So, Alex, do you see any other questions?
No,
we
that was
missed?
pretty much all the questions were answered.
Okay.
And I want to thank everybody, and I thought it was outstanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rick and Alex, for presenting tonight. And in just conclusion of the webinar, I just want to take a second and highlight some pretty cool stuff that we've got planned for the Advanced Hunter Education Program. In 2024, there's a QR code in my background. And if you click on that, you're going to see upcoming webinars that we're going to be having. We're going to be doing a land navigation webinar. And then, of course, the one I've already mentioned, how to sight in a scope rifle. And then later on in March, we're going to be doing a webinar on how to call and hunt wild turkeys. And we've also got some in-person clinics planned. Seats are filling up really, really fast on those, but is still room in a long-range rifle hunting clinic and a few other clinics. So get signed up for those, get registered for those. And with that, we'll sign off. I want to thank you again, Rick and Alex. Thanks for serving the hunting community this way.
Thank you.
Take care.